Hello everybody, welcome to this very special Drum webinar in partnership with Adverity. I'm the editor of the Drum Network, Chris Sutcliffe. I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to anybody who's listening to this, but agency resources are being squeezed, while at the same time agencies are being asked to deliver more on behalf of their clients. So what can agencies do to compensate for that mismatch of expectations between what they can deliver and what they have the resources to deliver? And what can technology add to that conversation? Well, to answer that question, I'm joined by three fantastic guests who'll be able to share their expertise on what we can all do to make the most of our tech stacks. I'll ask them to introduce themselves now.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Alex. I head up agency network relationships here at Adverity. So I work alongside the big agency networks and all their sub-agencies as well. So yeah, glad to be joining.
Fantastic. And Bobby?
Yeah, hi guys. So I'm Bobby. So I'm the head of analytics and data marketing at Artifact. So I guess my role is all about trying to use data to drive efficiencies across the business, as well as using it to look at driving incremental gains in terms of growth and revenue for our clients.
And finally, last but not least, Rob.
Hi everyone. I'm Rob Francis. I'm the Global Data and Platform Director at Wavemaker. My role is really delivering reporting for our largest global clients, and similar to Bobby, looking at efficiencies and how we can use data to make better decisions for our media.
So as we mentioned in the introduction, agencies are having to deal with fewer resources than ever before, but sky-high client expectations. So I wondered if, Bobby, you could give us some context for why we found ourselves in that situation.
Yeah, of course. Great question. So I guess, especially now in the current climate, every business is looking at how to drive efficiencies and ultimately looking at where they can kind of improve processes. But I guess as our clients expect us as agencies to become more data-driven, to deliver insight faster, and to be able to make kind of proactive rather than reactive decisions, that's led to every single decision needing to be done on the basis of data, but in an instant. And so obviously having efficient processes and having efficient utilization of data is key to getting to those decisions quickly.
Absolutely. And Rob, then, to what extent do we rely on analytics to try and drive that almost streamlining of the process?
Yeah, I think to a very large extent, if we look traditionally, everything has been done very manually. And perhaps using people's gut instinct to make decisions. Now, in a world where perhaps we have less resources, we need to look at ways that we can better automate that, or whether we're actually putting that data to use, either through something like machine learning to make better decisions. All of that can be done in an ideal world with fewer resources. Now, clearly, there's constraints in terms of getting things set up, getting access to data, but ultimately the position we want to be in is actually being able to make smarter decisions much more quickly, and we need to use sort of technology and analytics to be able to do that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you said the ideal world there, but clearly we don't live in an ideal world, and there is a seeming mismatch between what everyone wants to be doing and sort of what clients actually expect us to be doing as well. So we discussed the why there, but Alex, what about the how of it? How are agencies having to deal with all this, and sort of what's the drive for data like?
Well, I think the how is very varied depending on the types of agencies. I think you've got lots of different types of agencies that deal with clients in various different stages of like digital maturity. So what a client needs to offer or what an agency needs to offer their clients very much depends on what is a big enough leap and what is too far to be leaping technology-wise. So the very basic is just simply being able to report reliably with current data and moving away from, like Rob has said, manual reporting. And then the next layer on top of that is actually taking it a step further and saying, well, if we've got live data, what can we do to provide more value from that live data rather than just simply reporting on what has happened in the past? And I think that's the real key thing of where we're headed towards in this industry.
Yeah, certainly. Well, you mentioned sort of where we're headed for the industry, but the reality is that it's been a long road to get here. So, Alex, I wondered if you could maybe take us through what some of the main pain points around data are and sort of how agencies are having to grapple with these huge reams of data that they have?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the key issues that happens in agencies is just the pure data collection. There are so many different platforms now, and it is going to continue to grow in terms of where clients are partnering with other services to collect data or different types of data. Or maybe they want to go into further detail around what users are doing through their own sort of native platforms or websites or apps. So all this data just kind of snowballs into a massive problem of we're collecting the data, but we've got nothing to actually use it. And this is where they really run into their first hurdle of just data collection. The second hurdle is how do you use all these different areas of data in a way where you can actually tell a single story? And that's the key thing, is how do agencies and their clients join up all this data into a way where they can actually analyze it and say that doing X resulted in Y. So these challenges are kind of the biggest thing that are blocking this kind of route to innovation.
Rob, I wondered if you could maybe elaborate on that point about actually using the analytics there to tell a story. Has that been a challenge for agencies over the past couple of years? And sort of what stage are we at along that journey?
Definitely. I would say just getting access to data and bringing it into one place has been probably, certainly in the larger agencies that I've worked in, a very big challenge, whether that's people having wanted to protect the silos where their data is, or whether it's actually just how difficult it is to get access to, and especially things like website analytics data where we might not necessarily control or own it. It can be very difficult to get a full picture. But I think in terms of where people are on the journey, I think there are people in very different places, and even within agencies, I think on clients we see very different journeys, and a lot of that will come down to the particular client, what their focus is on, and particularly at the moment with such a strong focus on e-commerce, I think there's our big e-commerce clients are perhaps much more advanced because they have a lot of the data that perhaps you just wouldn't naturally have access to if that's not your core business. So I think we've seen a lot of improvements in the last few years, and I think certainly cloud technology and cloud computing has made analytics much more accessible than perhaps it was even just 2 or 3 years ago, particularly how easy it is just to set something up and run a trial very quickly and easily. But how we actually build that into long-term strategy, I think is still the challenge that I think agencies are grappling with.
And, we mentioned e-commerce there, and that's one of those trends that we've seen really come to the fore over the last couple of years. But in the same way, it means now that clients have very different expectations about what we can do with the data that we have, depending on who they are. So, Bobby, what have been some of the sort of key trends over the past couple of years? And is it now fair to say that agencies need to have a completely holistic view to deliver, data stories to very different clients?
Yeah, I think obviously the big change is over the last few years have been around the volume of customer data that you now have access to. So we now have the ability to truly understand customer behaviors, especially in a digital perspective. And whilst we're maybe moving away from that one-to-one personalization relationship, we still need to understand customer behaviors to be able to provide contextual information and segmentation information. I guess the key part of that is, how do you make use of that at scale? And I guess one of the biggest challenges, I think, as the other guys have mentioned as well, is getting access to that data, but then making it readily available to make decisions on the top of, right? So I think the likes of machine learning and the likes of AI will start to come even more to the fore as we need to get more granular with data, and we need to become, I guess, more automated in that decision making. And I guess the key part there is that we have more data than we've ever been able to use, and it's about being able to tell those data stories, understand customer behaviors, and ultimately understand how customers behave and what those next actions look like.
And just before we move on, I wondered if you could maybe take us through some of the historical challenges about collating all that user data into one area, because user journeys are so varied, and it's incredibly difficult to collect that all in the one place. So I wonder if you could maybe provide some context for that.
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously, like I say, you can get really granular data from like web analytics and things like that. And so it's really tricky to be able to navigate that to pull out a story. And so ultimately, the key part of that is being able to quickly access that data, store it, transform it, and then get it ready for use. And I think historically that's been done kind of quite manually, or it's then been moving into kind of what can be quite time-consuming maintenance of a lot of API connections and a lot of data warehousing solutions. And ultimately, it's about building a kind of connected data ecosystem that will allow you to do that in an automated fashion. So I guess the biggest challenge has been building that automated process to give you the end result. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Rob, from your perspective, you mentioned, you've worked at a number of different agencies. How universal are those challenges across, agency size and specialization?
I'd say they are fairly universal. I think smaller agencies perhaps can be a bit more agile and can be able to respond in perhaps a slightly different way, whereas a larger agency can look to leverage scale. But I think ultimately, particularly for agencies that have been around for a while, there are a lot of legacy processes that are already in place, and it's changing culture, it's changing the way people work, as much as it is about technology. So for me, there's definitely a lot of things that are universal across the industry, and I think all agencies face these challenges. But I also think there are, depending on the agency, depending on where the particular vertical that they're working in, there are slightly different challenges. And again, I think it comes down to as much about the agency as it is about the client and their readiness and how they are prepared for using data and for sharing data. I've worked with clients who are very protected of their data and don't necessarily want to share that. And that can be a challenge in its own way, because if we're only looking at a very small piece of the picture, it's very difficult to make assumptions about performance and how we can really take the account to the next level. And I think that's going to be a challenge, whoever you are. But other clients who are much more open, willing to share data, that tends to be much, we have a much better result of that, and we can really see the gains of getting access to those additional data sets to really enrich our data.
And actually, leading on from that, Alex, from the conversations that you've had with agencies then, to what extent do they expect almost that there are tech solutions to all these problems? And, do they expect that these tech solutions should be off the shelf or more bespoke?
That's a great question. So the expectation of what is available can be quite polar. I think some agencies will have people within the business that understand that a technology solution exists, and those people will have an understanding of what they should be looking for, and there will be a certain expectation of there should be something that can do this off the shelf. On the other side of the coin, you've got agencies that don't even realize that there is an alternative to logging into Facebook and downloading a report every month, or logging into Google AdWords, that monthly report. And likewise, that education piece then doesn't filter back down to their clients. So that sort of increase in maturity never gets passed on. So there's kind of an education piece still going on in our industry, where you've got people like Rob and Bobby, who are very much at the forefront of not only just using the technology, but understanding what the technology could do for the businesses moving forwards. And then on the other side of things, we're just helping people get on board with using data in a way that helps them start to understand what data could really do for their business. So, yeah, it can be very different across the entire scale.
Actually, I just wanted to pick up on something you just said there. Do you think that a sort of a really elaborate and powerful tech stack is a differentiator anymore, or is it something that is nice to have, but potentially you can almost get around with some holistic tools?
An elaborate tech stack can be one of those things that agencies feel they need to have. It's almost as if it's a selling point that they choose every single piece within their tech stack. The reality is that can cause more headaches than it creates opportunity for them as an agency. And that kind of problem creating out of feeling that they're doing the right thing in picking all their own tools can actually kind of put them behind the rest of the pack that are saying, well, you know what, we don't want to focus on this problem that we should have dealt with as an industry 2 or 3 years ago. And those that don't go down the complex tech stack route are actually freeing up their own internal teams to go after the real cutting edge stuff. So using modeling, machine learning, artificial intelligence, that is where the agencies that get past the idea of having a complex tech stack around data collection and storage, and that's where they're able to move to.
All right. I think it's interesting that you mentioned there's almost an educational aspect to this. Bobby, to what extent do you think that internally at agencies there's an understanding of what can be done with data, or is it still seen as a bit of a siloed, almost arcane art?
I think everybody has a view on what can be done with data. I think the key challenge for a lot of agencies is firstly identifying what they want to do with data, and essentially what are the advanced use cases that they would like to get to. But then the first thing is, well, are our foundations in place to allow for that? And I think in a lot of cases, the answer is no. In a lot of cases, there are still individual teams who work in data manually every single day to try and get to optimization, to get to analysis. And ultimately, they don't have that foundation layer that allows them to, I guess, focus on the innovation, focus on what is the key problem that we're trying to solve, or the key piece of insight that's going to help us deliver competitive advantage. And I think the key part there is, how do they get to understanding what that foundation is? And I guess it's about auditing your processes and understanding how much time you actually spend in data every day. And that then gives you that kind of business case to understand, well, actually, we do need to make a change here to allow our teams to focus on the strategy and using the data rather than manipulating it.
All right, okay, that makes sense. And Rob, as a bit of a follow-up to that then, where are those smart agencies placing their chips? Say that they've got that kind of internal understanding of what data should be used for them. Where are the better agencies now, or rather the best agencies in class? Where are they actually putting their investment when it comes to tech? Is it in machine learning, like you said? Is it in AI? Is it in those kind of all-in-one solutions?
Yeah, so for me, what I've seen is very much having a framework. So not necessarily having an all-in-one tech stack, but having modular approach that allows you to plug and play in the right technology, but also means that you're not locked in, because certainly that's a concern that I've seen where it might be difficult to swap providers, and then you're paying tech debt for a number of years. Also, I think that a change that I've seen is historically with data teams, there has been a central data team who kind of sit and control or maybe own the data, and they'll work with client teams to understand the client needs, but they don't necessarily have all the intrinsic knowledge. So I think that's kind of changing now, where there's a smaller central team who are very much responsible for the engineering of the data, but then we put the actual logic and the control in the hands of the client teams, and we're seeing data specialists within the client teams moving forward.
I suppose, Alex, following on from that, from the conversations that you've had with agencies then, from your perspective, what does effective use of data look like? And sort of from Adverity's point of view, what can agencies be doing more of?
So I suppose the best place to start with that question is what ineffective use of data is. And ineffective use of data is having your internal teams go and fetch data and spend more time in the process of collection than actually looking at what that data says. Those that are truly efficient at data have everything set up from the platforms in which they're generating data. So this could be from everything from ad servers to social platforms, etc. And they've already got that data flowing into a place where they can now visualize it and know what they're looking for without having to set up those reports. The ones that are incredibly efficient with data, and we've got to bear in mind that what is efficient is just simply being in the top percentage of agencies. And there's still a huge bulk of agencies out there that don't sit in this truly efficient space yet. But those that are truly efficient are actually using data to make decisions around where they place budget, what kind of campaigns they're going to clients and saying, this is what you should be running moving forwards. And those suggestions aren't done on a ad hoc or a sort of a batch basis. It's the kind of thing that their data allows them to do continuously. And I think that's where the real value add comes from an agency, and that comes from being efficient in the way that they manage their data processes.
Okay, that's interesting. So what implications, Rob, does that then have for who's actually using data internally? You know, and prior to sort of a platform like Adverity, has it changed in terms of who's actually, you know, collating and then using that data?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, there's been a lot of people who perhaps traditionally have been pulling data directly from platforms, whether that's Facebook, Google, whatever. You know, they've been producing reports perhaps on a weekly or monthly basis showing that performance. We have definitely been challenged a lot to say, actually, no, we need more real-time insight. We need to be making decisions. It's no good giving me a report that says we've wasted a load of money last week. Actually, we need to get in and stop spending that money straight away and make sure it's directed into better streams. So that's really been a focus for us, and how we can really adapt our processes. And as I mentioned before, having central data teams, and I think it's moved away now where we still have a central team, but actually we're putting the data into the hands of the client teams, but also bringing together the specialists across channels. So rather than just looking at a particular channel on its own, we're actually looking at it holistically and making much, hopefully, better decisions based on the whole array of data. And particularly, it obviously depends on your KPI. So if we're running an awareness campaign, then actually you know, sales and things like that are less relevant, but it's all about driving awareness as much as possible. So, you know, there's things there where we want to make sure we're reacting to the right metric, and you know, not just looking at impressions or clicks or whatever it is, but actually being much smarter with how we use data.
And would you say that that's the case across, you know, very different specialties? Is that a universal concern, or is it different between, say, media agencies and, you know, digital agencies?
Yes, I would say it is a concern across media, digital agencies. I think traditionally there's always been a very strong focus on a particular set of metrics and being very focused, whether that's click-through rate or whatever else. And, you know, that only gives us a very small part of the story, and how we can much better articulate and view our performance is that affects everybody. So there are multiple agencies, you know, creative agencies, I would include in that as well, who are very much changing their approach and how they work to much better focus on overall performance, but how we work together. And, you know, certainly in WPP, there's been a much bigger push for agencies to be much more integrated rather than working separately, and that's something that we're seeing a lot.
See, I think that's really interesting, because that's almost like the culmination of a lot of different trends that we've seen all sort of coming together there. And we've spoken a lot about sort of reporting on campaigns and seeing things in real time, but to what extent does a platform like Adverity help with things like client acquisition? Alex, what sort of tools do you have available to help agencies who are struggling with that at the moment? Having seen some data, we know that that's going to be a real focus for agencies over the next couple of years, and something that they're going to really struggle with.
Yeah, I think client acquisition is an interesting one. It's certainly when we speak with prospects and people not using tools like ours, client acquisition is one of the key motivators of kind of transforming their approach to data. I think having a solid agency pitch around not only what you're going to do with the money, but how you arrive at the decisions and make recommendations to your end client is really important. And I think that not only are agencies maturing in their approach to technology, but I think marketers in general have more visibility of tools that are available. And regardless of whether you do sort of you do kind of outsource that and use agencies like a lot of big businesses do, you will still have a lot of understanding and awareness of what tools they use. And you'll want to know that they're using all the right tools, because at the end of the day, you're the one putting your faith in that agency to operate your marketing budget.
Yeah, certainly. We've spoken a lot about efficiency here as well. And I thought that, Bobby, it might be interesting if you almost take us through the process and how it's changed in terms of how you actually measure your, the rate of improvement that you're seeing, in terms of how you deal with data. So back from when it used to be sort of a very, very tricky situation to now when you can do so many more things with kind of the one platform, how has that journey improved? Where are you seeing the efficiency come from? Is it having more trained staff? Is it having everything in one place?
I think there's a lot of efficiencies that can be driven when using a platform like Adverity, to be honest. I think the first thing is that kind of speed to insight, and like we've mentioned a few times, on that kind of reporting piece, because obviously we've mentioned that clients want more information about their customers. They want more information about how their campaigns are performing, and ultimately, what do we expect the campaign performance to look like next week? And so often kind of our media operations guys are in the data every single day, every single minute of every single day, to try and pull together answers to these ad hoc requests, pull together information ready for monthly and weekly reporting. And when you actually sit and take a step back and audit how much time is spent on just kind of transforming this data, it's quite scary, because there's so much that needs to be done, right? And so ultimately that takes away from the strategic development, or the better understanding of customer behaviors, or the what's the next piece of tech that we should be implementing to really drive growth. And so from our perspective, we carried out that auditing process when we onboarded Adverity, and we started to find kind of where the main issues were, and that was around kind of delivering the kind of ad hoc requests and the reporting every week. And so what a platform like Adverity has allowed us to do is to essentially collect all that data, transform it so that each of our teams has a cleaned and ready to use data output for these processes. We then look at the types of requests that we get from an ad hoc perspective, and we then start to kind of build like a menu of services. So how do we deliver insight when we're looking at these specific ad hoc requests so that we cover all bases? And I think we were saving like plus 100 hours a week just on kind of reporting ad hoc across the whole business already. And so that's where we're really starting to see that our teams are getting the time back, and they're starting to really spend more time on the strategy and the development and the tool usage.
You said it was a scary figure, and then you said it, and it was genuinely terrifying. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. You've got to think about that. There's a lot of people involved in that. We have 100 people who are involved in marketing operations every day. So ultimately, it sounds more scary than if you've just got 2 people doing it, right? But there's a lot of ad hoc requests that come in. There's a lot of reporting, manual reporting that has to be done. And so from our perspective, we already built a kind of proprietary solution, but actually that proprietary solution was quite difficult to maintain as we started to scale. And so that's when a solution like Adverity comes in and helps us to essentially do that data collection in an efficient manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob, then it sounds like a lot of what we've been discussing is actually in service of optimization as well as of existing processes. So to what extent then do tech tools help really accelerate that? And who has the hand on the tiller internally?
I would say that technology plays a very important part, but it's only a small part. It's very much an enabler, but we have to have the foundations in place to be able to take advantage of their technology. So that's people, processes, culture, all of that has to be in alignment. Otherwise, you can have the best tool in the world, and it's only going to be maybe 10% as effective as it can be. So that's the first part. I would say in terms of investment, it very much depends, but typically, certainly the CTOs of the world, but also our data strategists have a very important part to play in that. So a lot of people are trying to sell directly into either our clients or into our client teams. So it's making sure that we're all joined up and we're all having the same conversation, because we don't want to be making decisions on a particular client that necessarily go against the overall strategic aim that we have. So I think it's very much a team effort, but fundamentally, the budgets generally sit with the client. So if we're spending money, the client teams are going to be very much involved in that.
See, I think that's really interesting as well. Alex, from the conversations that you've had then, how much of it is sort of an educational aspect to clients versus agencies? How much do you think clients understand about what is possible through this kind of optimized use of data?
It can vary. I think some of the leading agencies and sort of the more engaged agencies, by the time they work with someone like us, they know what data they can pull in. I think their biggest challenge can often be making the most of that opportunity, and that can be down to clients either not understanding or not being willingly forthcoming with their data. So a retailer may not want to hand over their sales or even sort of more detailed performance data around the products that they sell, but to an agency, that kind of data could be massively valuable in the way that they operate their campaigns. So I think helping their end clients understand the capabilities of the tools that their agency is using, to understand that if they trust their agency with their data, in partnership, the client and the agency can develop better results. I think any way that a business like Adverity can help that industry as a whole kind of progress, the more we'll get out of our marketing data. And we are seeing more of that.
And so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I think what's important is that we do reiterate that agencies are having to do more with fewer resources. So what are you most excited about over the next couple of years in terms of using technology and data to really help do that? Are there any particular areas, whether that's machine learning, whether that's the ability to tell more comprehensive stories using accurate data? What are you really excited about?
Yeah, so I'd say everything we've done up till now has been very much about putting the foundations in place and setting that level to really allow us to unlock and move to the next phase. And for me, the next phase is a combination. It's not necessarily just one thing, but it's a combination. And to be honest, you probably mentioned the two things that I was going to really sort of draw out. One is data storytelling. So not just saying this is exactly where this number of metrics, this whatever it is, but it's actually putting that into context and building much bigger stories around it. I think it's going to be a really strong area of growth. I think the other thing for us is really we're just scratching the surface of how we're using machine learning to make better decisions. So again, I think actually having much more automated, where actually we are going beyond just making suggestions, but actually getting to the point where already we can go directly into a platform and make alterations, but we don't really want to do that without a human touching it. But I think as we move forward, we're going to become much more comfortable with how the decisions are made and why.
Yeah, I think it goes on from Rob's point around that we're only really just sort of scratching the surface with what AI and machine learning can actually enable us to do in terms of decision making. So, and I think at Artifact, what we're trying to do is to essentially build data platforms that allow you to add on these building blocks of machine learning and AI kind of operations to help you make those decisions. So, giving customers that flexibility of what are the building blocks that will help me to solve my problem. I think one of the biggest blockers that we've seen for kind of AI machine learning adoption is not really understanding what problem it is that you're trying to solve. And so once you understand the problem you're trying to solve, you then have a much better understanding of how to get there and what are the building blocks of information that I need to be able to make that decision.
The AI and machine learning part is the bit that excites me. And there's different sort of trains of thought with it. The first one is obviously where you use a pre-built module on top of your existing data. And then other agencies will choose to build their own models and algorithms to fit it in with the way that they do business for their clients. Both approaches are completely fine and reasonable and should, in theory, achieve the same result. The thing with using machine learning and AI is that ultimately, for a exact same set of data, the end result that is the most efficient or most effective recommended output in terms of an algorithm will be the same no matter who builds it. There will be an optimal way of doing it. So really the arms race is around who can provide the most accurate answer. And that isn't necessarily around the algorithms. It's around how many data points they have that algorithm sat on top of. So the exciting thing for me is not necessarily the application of the technology that sits on top of the data, but it's around how, as we become more mature in using this data, agencies and their clients become more open to allowing more data to feed into those decisions. And maybe in the future, we see a different approach to marketing that is more led around sort of the sales approach, or what is a profitable route to marketing, rather than a clicks and impressions and a traditional digital KPI-led approach. So I think we're on the verge with technology of seeing the entire approach to digital marketing kind of being flipped on its head. And that alone should be exciting.
And then, as a final question, what would be all of your main pieces of advice to other agency professionals when it comes to actually optimizing efficiency and making clients happy for a longer time? If we could begin with Rob.
Sure. So I think it's very much around making sure you choose the right tools and technology, but also recognizing that that is just a piece of the whole puzzle. So it's very much in terms of making sure we're using the best tools and tech and that they work for us, but it's also ensuring that our processes are very much aligned. So whether that's things like naming conventions, one of my favorite topics, or whether it's through other processes, really to ensure efficiencies as much as possible. So I think it's not necessarily that there's just one thing that is a magic bullet that's going to solve everything overnight, but it's understanding incremental gains, and that actually if we can just improve lots of things by a small percent, we can see much greater returns.
Fantastic. And Bobby?
Cool. Yeah, I think similar to what Rob was saying, but I think it was already critical that businesses started to look inwardly before kind of the current situation around obviously COVID. But obviously it's even more critical now for everyone to start trying to find efficiencies in processes, efficiencies in the way they do things. And I guess my piece of advice for right now would be take the time to essentially do the auditing, start to understand where you can start to automate processes, how you can standardize the way that you do things, and ultimately, how do you get to operational excellence, which is what you were delivering beforehand, but in the most efficient manner. And so taking that time to audit those processes will ultimately get you to the point of understanding what the problem is to be solved. Is it around how much time you spend with data? Is it around the fact that your teams are too siloed so they don't get to share key insights? And once you have that information, you'll then know the steps in terms of how do you drive more efficiency within your teams.
And then, Alex, to finish off, what would be your one or two pieces of advice that you have?
Yeah, I think really it just echoes Bobby and Rob's points around the first bit is kind of looking at where in your agency you can free up and upskill existing members of the team from their current roles and move them into areas that as a business makes them more productive, but also personally, I think it can be more rewarding to their careers to be working on something that even right now is still cutting edge. And moving them away from some of the more mundane, traditional data analyst work. And then the second piece is in enabling people to move into these roles, you need to have the right tools that do those more traditional data collection and harmonization tasks that free up their time to do the more entertaining, rewarding, and interesting work for clients. So choosing an approach to your technology that is scalable and future-proof, and ultimately can fit in with how you want to deliver a service for your clients moving forwards. I think that's kind of a key consideration for agencies right now.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like the industry is moving in the right direction, and that finally marketers will be able to really concentrate on the creative side of it, powered by data that we've always been wanting to do. So thank you very much to my guests, Alex, Bobby, and Rob. If you do have any questions for our speakers, please do feel free to email drumstudios@thedrum.com. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and thank you again to my very, very good guests.